Whatever you do in your career, you should pursue something that you're really interested in and excited about, whether that be the field you're going to be in or the company you're going to join. It's going to be very hard for you to do your best work if you're not enjoying what you're doing. So whatever it is you go do, you should, at a minimum, make sure you enjoy it. That'll allow you to work hard at it. It'll allow you to give your all. That's going to be a key piece of being successful.
Hi, I'm Jubin, operating partner at Kleiner Perkins, and I'm excited that you're tuning into Grit. The goal of this is not for it to be a highlight reel of how successful my guests are, rather a candid exploration of how hard it is, both personally and professionally, to create, build, and scale world-class organizations. If you're a fan of the show, please subscribe, leave a review, and make sure to follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thanks. When I was walking in, I had this weird thought, which was like, it was a mall. Right?
Yeah.
It's like you're in the top of this mall where like it's this beautiful view, but like you're one of the largest digital companies, full stop, not even retailers, companies in the world. There was this weird paradox that I was experiencing walking through, an empty mall like most of them are. It's obviously early in the morning, so maybe it picks up later, but like it's a mall. Malls aren't what they used to be. Does that weird to you? Like when you walk in every day, it's like kind of a stark reminder.
This mall and the one it's connected to are great malls. And so it's kind of neat, actually, because if you think about the business we're in, walking by retail stores, they're well merchandised. I mean, it's kind of great, right? It reminds you of what you're doing.
But like, do you think that you're competing with malls or are you disrupting malls in some way? Isn't part of the deal that like, I don't have to go to a mall to get a bunch of my home goods anymore?
Absolutely, in the sense that we offer incredible selection, great service. Yeah. You don't need to go to a mall. At the same time, we just opened our first large format Wayfair store in Chicago, 150,000 square foot store. It's a destination. It's amazing. And so our view is, hey, we've got the most advanced logistics network for home. We've got the best technology for home. Well, let's meet the customer wherever they want to meet us. Let's offer the absolute best experiences end to end, whether it's online, whether it's in a store, whether it's a customer who goes back and forth. We can do all that.
How long has it been since you is this your first ever store, first ever physical store?
We have 5 brands. So we have Wayfair,
yeah.
We have a luxury platform, Paragold, and then we have 3 specialty retail brands, All Modern, Birch Lane, and Joss & Main. Those 3, we have stores for those 3, for All Modern, Birch Lane, Joss & Main. But we only started opening them in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But it's the first large format store for us, absolutely.
How long has this been in discussion for? Like you guys have been doing this business for 23 years?
Yeah. So we thought about stores for a number of years.
There's no way it's like not one of the number one things that comes up in every meeting. I would
say like 6 years ago, we started tinkering with the idea of pop-up stores and small format stores. And then this particular effort, what you're seeing opening now, we started 3 years ago. Because it takes a while to design what you want, then a while to find the location, then a while to permit it and build it, and then open it. So it's not something you can open. Opening a large format store is not something you can do overnight.
How weird of that is it to build that muscle for core Wayfair when?
What I would say is there's pieces of it we know how to do really well, right? What is the assortment? How do we do the delivery and logistics? How do we market it, get people to know who we are and come to it? So there's a set of things that we're already very good at and that we get to leverage the fact that we already do every day. And then I would say actually like the store itself, the store experience and operating the store itself, that's a new muscle. But if you kind of look at us over the years, we're not afraid of taking on new things. In fact, we kind of relish it. So in 2015, 2016, when we got into logistics, today we have 25 million square feet of fulfillment centers, transportation terminals. We have, probably between 500,000 trucks on the road every day doing deliveries of 2-person deliveries where 2 folks are going to carry it up to, your room that you want the item in, set it up, leave, take all the packaging with them. We didn't have any logistics before that. And then we built that over the last decade to having the most extensive logistics network for home goods. We started with a focus on technology, but today we have a technology organization that's over 2,000 people building world-class technology. And again, we specialize in this category. So taking on new things and figuring them out is sort of exciting to us, particularly on things that we think can be transformative to how we operate. And so we think physical retail is one of those. And so we're figuring it out, but we got to learn some stuff.
Don't you think that after 20 plus years of chipping away at something, you have to do new things, mainly as like a survival mechanism to keep it interesting, like keep pushing the envelope?
Well, I think that we certainly believe that we're going to constantly be figuring out new things, and we do approach it that way. I don't know that all companies do that. I think a lot of companies get very comfortable with what they're good at, and they just want to stick to that. The bar to do something new sometimes, I think, for those companies is very high.
Do you feel like that's especially true in your line of work in retail?
I think it's true in most industries. I think there's a lot of large companies that are very comfortable doing what they know how to do.
How big is the company today?
We're about $12 billion in revenue. We have over 10,000 people. We operate in a number of countries.
It's insane. 10,000 people. When I was outside waiting, like outside this room, there was all this furniture. And I had a random thought. You might give me the politically correct answer, which is fine. But what are the rules of engagement around the furniture that you're allowed to have in your house? Meaning, if I'm the, CEO of Mercedes.
Yep.
Do I only get to drive Mercedes? Like, what if every once in a while I want a Bentley or something? Like, how does that work?
So my wife and I, everything that's in the categories we're in, we buy from Wayfair. And remember, between Wayfair, Birch Lane, All Modern, Joss & Main, Paragold, we have such an extensive selection. We have all the best brands. We have all the best selection. You really don't need to go anywhere else. We are going to be your best destination, whether you want to do something that's custom made, whether you want to buy something that's very budget and simple and easy. We have that breadth of selection. So my argument would be, why would we need to go somewhere else?
So you're giving me the politically correct answer.
No, but that's what we really do.
You actually do that.
We actually do that, yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you a different way. If you go to a mall with your wife, which I'm sure you do.
Yep.
This mall, whatever, right? Do you go into other furniture stores?
Oh, yeah. So I do that all the time. I would say,
like as a scouting trip?
Well, scouting, I'm always curious what, you see trends, you see how others are approaching things. And I'm always curious what other retailers are doing in terms of where are they anchoring their assortment and how are they pricing it? Where's the pricing? Where's the value? What are the trends? And, you can figure that out looking at their websites, but you can figure that out in stores. And particularly as we're pushing into physical retail, I find walking other retail stores very interesting.
So, okay, let me ask you this way. Is there a thing that you or she has wanted in the home that the muscle memory would be like, go to Wayfair or go to one of the sub brands, right? And find it and order it.
Yep.
What if you don't carry it? What if it's something eclectic? Are you like, I have to go to Restoration Hardware or something? Like, God damn it.
We have a great selection. For example, on Wayfair, we sell a lot of wall art. But I would say in our house, we have a lot of original art that we've bought from artists and bought in galleries that is not from Wayfair. So I'd say there are categories where it's blurry in terms of what do we offer versus what you might want to buy. But when you start talking about mainstream things, no, we found our selection works really well.
How does it work with family? Like, let's just say family and friends. Are they like, hey, can I just come by and grab a few things? Can I just come to the office? There's got to be that.
We have an employee discount program.
Okay.
And so I would say the big ask folks who work at Wayfair get is, from their relatives, hey, can you buy this for me using your discount?
Yeah, it's like Lulu.
Can I just buy it from you using your discount? I think that is probably a pretty common thing that happens out there. I know it happens for me. We want folks to shop with us, so we love that. But I think that's kind of what happens. There isn't a lot of people wanting to walk into a warehouse and carry something off. No, we don't really support that.
Have you been in Boston forever?
Yes. So Steve Conine and I, the two co-founders of Wayfair, we went to Cornell together.
Yeah.
And we graduated in 95. And we came to Boston. We started our first company right out of college. And so we've basically worked together since 1995. We started Wayfair in 2002, but we've basically been in Boston for, 30 years.
Where were you guys raised?
I grew up in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts, right near the New York State border.
Oh, not far.
It's about a little over 2 hours west of here. And he grew up in New Jersey outside of New York City.
And when you were growing up, what was dinner conversation like for you? When you were sitting at the dinner table, did you have a mom, dad, siblings? Like, was it a core family? Like, what?
Yeah, so my mom and dad and my brother. Yeah. My brother's 4 years younger than me. And my mom and dad grew up in India. And my dad came to the U.S. for his master's degree in engineering. He ended up working at GE for 30 years as an engineer, but then running manufacturing operations. He married my mom, and she obviously came from India as well. So yeah, the core was the four of us. We have some relatives in the U.S., but not that many. So the dinner conversation would be the four of us. And, I'd say we're pretty tight knit.
Is it weird for them seeing, maybe it's been so gradual that they've probably gradually become accustomed to like their son achieving what he has. Is that weird for them? Especially coming from India, coming to the States.
Being an immigrant, I think, is a very significant form of being an entrepreneur, because you sort of embark on this journey that has a lot of risk, has a lot of unknowns, and you do it because you're very excited and optimistic about where you could go over time, but with no real guarantees or certainty. My parents were both quite entrepreneurial. My mother's father was an entrepreneur. So I think in many ways they understood sort of the excitement about being an entrepreneur. And then I think they're very proud and very excited. My dad actually retired from his kind of career right around the time we were starting the business. And so he ended up joining us in the early days of this company when we were like 5 or 6 people. And
of Wayfair?
At Wayfair. And he worked with us for 10 years or over 10 years.
No way.
Yeah.
You're kidding me.
It was great. Yeah.
No way. He worked for you.
Again, I said his career was in manufacturing. Well, when we were starting the business and building the business, the biggest thing we had, it's like everyone was focused on either adding products to the catalog or taking care of customers. And we had this recipe around how we build selection, how we sort it on the site, and then how we advertise and drive traffic, take care of customers, they buy things, and it just repeat. Well, obviously, every time you sell something, you have a supplier sending you an invoice. You have to pay that invoice. And so what would happen is the invoices, they would just be the stack of mail. We'd open it and, if it got to be about, 6 or 12 inches high, we're like, oh, somebody's got to stop focusing on adding products or taking care of customers. And they need to enter all these invoices. And then I would like lock myself in this little room we had in our first office, which is basically the size of a closet, and just write checks all day to pay all these invoices, because obviously our suppliers want to get paid. And it wasn't that we didn't want to pay them. It's just that the priority of dealing with the finances was not at the top of the list. So my dad had retired, and he was one of those guys who never had a ton of hobbies. So he was just sort of like, he's going a little bit stir crazy. And so I said, hey, if you want to help us, like you could just take care of all the finances, because we just have the order volumes growing really fast and things are going really well. But there's an important thing to attend to, because like every time, we have to buy the product, ship the product, pay the suppliers, and we just need to keep track of that better. And we just need to be tighter in how we do it. He joined when, again, we were a handful of people. We're growing really fast. And he stayed for definitely over 10 years. I'm trying to remember what year he retired fully. But in any case, stayed for a very long time. The company changed dramatically over that time. And my mom and dad live right here in Boston. My brother lives right here in Boston. So it's been great.
How do you decide if he gets promoted?
My dad sort of…
that's like kind of tongue in cheek.
He was never like in the management structure per se. He kind of like… He
reported to nobody.
He ran the finance for a long time. And then as we got bigger and we built a real finance organization, but he kind of like, he just focused on that piece of it around the kind of core order flow.
And at the time when the business was actually starting to work, that must have been pretty cool to like have him as a part of the business.
It was super exciting. And I got to say, like in the beginning, like when we started in 2002, I think it's hard for folks to remember back then, but it was like the early days of Google AdWords. It was like the very beginning of that. And Yahoo at the time, there's a third party called Overture that they used that they, I think, eventually bought. And then it was effectively their Google AdWords. And those are the two main sources of traffic that we had in the super early days. And everything was like very quantitative, and we were one of the early adopters of it. And so we figured out, hey, here's how we can have the best selection. We can have the merchandising be really strong and the pricing be really good. And so if we got traffic, we knew we could convert better than others. And we would measure that. And by measuring that, it would allow us to bid more than others so we could get more traffic, because we made sure that we could convert it well by having a great offering for customers. And that flywheel, sort of the early years of the business, was driven off that flywheel and expanding selection, expanding categories. It became much more nuanced over time, but that was sort of, people talk about product market fit. We ended up with product market fit very early. We figured that out and we just scaled using that.
And for the holidays, do you and your dad did you talk shop?
Yes and no. I mean, we of course would, but I think the other thing that happened, so we started in 2002, got married in 2003. My wife and I, our son was born in 2004, our daughter was born in 2006. So the early years of the company also coincides with a very busy personal time in my life, which is our family. So our kids today are, much older. Obviously, they're almost 18 and 20, so they're grown up. But, those early years, so, kind of my life was really, there was no golf in my life at that time, right? Mm-hmm. There's sort of like working, being really excited about that, and spending time with my wife and kids and being really excited about that.
Did you feel like you weren't enough of either one or the other? Or did you feel like, you know what? I only get to have two priorities here, right? Golf maybe not be one of them. Maybe friends falls out of that bucket. What was that internal state like?
Honestly, yes, it felt like that to me, but I think it feels like that to quite a lot of people. That stage of their life, you're incredibly busy, but you're really excited about the things you're doing, but they are time consuming. And one of the things you realize is that you do get a lot more time. You get it back over time. You had it when you were younger. You're then in a period of time in your life where you're incredibly busy, and then you get back your time over time. So that is a period of time where you want to focus on those activities. I enjoyed them, right? So it worked out for me.
Do you feel like you have more time now than you did?
I definitely have more time now.
You think so?
I think so. I mean,
can I tell you why I ask? One of the feelings that folks in your shoes have described to me is that often when they become this big, the company becomes this big, they basically don't even own their own calendars anymore. Now, maybe you have some of the time back on the personal life, but doesn't the responsibility of the job somewhat shadow some of the things that happened on the personal side? Or do you think that's just completely wrong?
Well, I think, to your point, I think you do get time back on the personal side as the kids get older. So absolutely, that's a real thing. And then on the job side, I would say what the activities are that fill my calendar have changed over the years. But I would say I've always been a very hard worker. And so the number of hours per week is not necessarily something that's gone up. The form in which it's structured, maybe you have more obligations that are determined, quarters and years ahead of time, and the calendars maybe more, structured in that way. But when you talk about the kind of time, just the sheer amount of time, I don't think it's necessarily gotten busier. The scheduling and the travel's gotten more complicated. Maybe it would be a way to think about it.
In your day-to-day, do you have specific things that are very structured? As you think about how you organize a day or a week, are there things that are super consistent amongst those weeks?
I would say my calendar starts a little bit more by looking at the year. So we, of course, we have board meetings quarterly. We do business reviews twice a year in the business. You start adding up like these various kind of structured, we host our suppliers at supplier summits, and we do a handful of those a year. There's one for Wayfair, one for Paragon. And so you have these things that are calendared out far ahead of time, and they sort of anchor the calendar because there's events, they're located wherever they're located. So there's some travel associated with them, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time you kind of have this framework of your calendar that goes out, say 6, 12, 18 months into the future, and you kind of anchor around that. And then a lot of what I would say that inside the week becomes actually fairly dynamic. But there's things I strive to do every week. I like to meet with each one of my direct reports once a week. I try to meet with certain other senior folks in the business on a certain frequency. So there's a cadence I'd like to have, but I would say in a given week, no, these kind of things that get calendared end up creating the structure. Yeah,
that makes sense. I was thinking about your parents when I was reading about you, and it's funny, the headlines about someone are really funny as they become successful, because I find that they very, very rarely are a articulation of who they actually end up being. Give you an example. Last week I was with Jay Chaudhry, the Zscaler founder, and every article is richest Indian American. Every article. That guy couldn't care less about money. Literally, he flies economy. He doesn't even fly private. He flies economy. Couldn't care less about money. And everything about him is about how rich he is. And, you read you and it's pictures of you at Allen & Co., or Boston billionaires list. Do you feel like it misses the point? Can you even look at this stuff? Are you just damn it? No, I have 10,000 people that work for this company. My dad, my co-founder, and 6 other people were basically there from the beginning. We've been cooking on this thing for now 25 years. Yet everything that is about you is all of this stuff that's headliney.
I think it's important not to spend too much time worrying about that. You want to be aware of maybe what's out there, but honestly, I think it probably will make you less happy if you spend all your time worrying about what folks are going to write about you. You'd be a lot happier if you just worry about doing the things you care about, spending time with people you care about, and pursuing things you want. And if you do that, I think you end up not worrying about those headlines. You don't pay a lot of attention to what they are, and you just they'll be what they are.
When you were growing up, did you have ambitions of, success? And what did that feel like as a kid to you? Was it money? Was it a company? Did you have this perception of what you thought success would feel like growing up?
Yeah, I think building a company, then often the scoreboard is in financial metrics, which is money. And then money obviously helps you then personally achieve whatever goals you have. So these things are somewhat interrelated. I would say I was always an entrepreneur. So what do I mean by that? Well, when I was in middle school, I started that neighborhood lawn mowing business, putting flyers under everyone's door. And then you get a bunch of lawns, you do a good job that summer. And then next summer, some other neighbors are, hey, like to cut our lawn. Obviously, that's a recurring revenue business. You talk about recurring revenue.
You get a good multiple of that in my line of work.
It's very steady, right? Very steady. The grass does grow. So that's an example. And then I had, I collected baseball cards, but then I turned it into this baseball card trading business where you'd pay for like a table at a show and you'd buy and sell and cards and try to build the value of your collection. And so I just did these different things. I had a paper route. You get a little bit of money for delivering the papers, but you'd make money off the tips. And so you try to figure out, for each person, where do they want the paper delivered? And this person wanted inside their garage, this person, and try to do a good job. And back in those days, you'd go around at the end of the month and have to collect all the money. This dates me, I guess. But, just the fact that there were printed papers and that you'd physically delivered them and then monthly you collected the money. But I enjoyed those things. And those were like mini businesses, if you will. And so that was always a passion. But in the days, like when I went to college, like 91 and 95, entrepreneurship was not thought of as something you could decide to pursue necessarily from a young age. It was sort of like, hey, you may get an opportunity at some point in your career to become an entrepreneur. And, I remember at Cornell, we took the one entrepreneurship course that Cornell offered at the time. Today, there's hundreds of entrepreneurship courses. It's thought of in a different way, but we sort of fell into starting our first business right out of college. And honestly, that is super exciting. And, looking back now, I'm glad we did.
What happened to that business?
Well, what it was in 1995 was basically the beginning of the commercial internet. And I was working part-time in a computer lab during college just to make some money. And so sort of learned about the internet from the early days. And so we basically ended up getting involved building some of the really early internet systems and applications and as a consultancy. So we were basically paid to build these. And the internet took off so fast that people were hiring kids basically in college, just out of college, for projects you never would otherwise. But, we did some work for Time Warner. Well, then one of the 4 folks who started the New York Times on the web was from that team. And so then they hired us to build their real estate classified system and build their first customer service system. And then, same thing happened. We got work at JP Morgan Chase and work at Merrill Lynch. And so it was super exciting. We ended up selling it during the whole dot-com boom in 1998 to a company called IXL. That company went public and grew a lot, eventually went out of business during the dot-com bust. Or I kind of out of business, maybe it's strict, but merged with a series of other companies over time. But that was a great experience. And so we spent kind of the first 6 or so years, 5, 6 years after college, basically seeing a wide variety of what was happening on the internet and being a part of quite a few of these businesses through the technology we were building. Then we worked on an idea for a software company. I was an EIR at Greylock, and that was kind of like a time period figuring out what we wanted to do. Long story short, in 2002, we started what today is Wayfair. So been at it now for 22 years, but it's kind of continued to be super exciting. And I'd say we keep, to your question earlier, we're always trying new things. It remains a ton of fun because you're working with amazing people. So that's kind of what gets me excited.
Was that acquisition, was that a single, a double, a triple, a home run for you? Like you were pretty young. That was a nice early ride.
That was sort of like a single, double. For that age, it was like fantastic.
How old were you?
25, I'd guess.
Yeah.
24, 25, somewhere.
Yeah. And that you became addicted right then and there to the whole game.
I'd say probably got addicted earlier than that. Got addicted as we were starting that company. It was like so exciting. This is a little bit of what happened. After we sold the company, we stayed with the company we sold to. And then after we left that company, both Steve and I went on this journey trying to figure out what we wanted to do next.
Independently.
We kind of did it a little bit working together on some ideas and a little bit separately working on stuff unrelated to each other. And we both kind of came to the conclusion we absolutely wanted to start something else. And, once you've done that, and if you enjoy that, it's very hard to kind of want to pursue something more traditional. You're just not as excited. And I always tell folks, whatever you do in your career, you should pursue something that you're really interested in and excited about, whether that be the field you're going to be in or the company you're going to join. It's going to be very hard for you to do your best work if you're not enjoying what you're doing. So whatever it is you go do, you should, at a minimum, make sure you enjoy it. That'll allow you to work hard at it. It'll allow you to give your all. That's going to be a key piece of being successful.
Yeah, I think this idea of, well, it's called work for a reason, but it's kind of a relic of what feels like the previous generation of folks, where it was like this chore, work. And if work's a chore all the time, I just can't imagine. I'm so grateful that I've never had the feeling of waking up on a Monday. You know, everyone's like dreading going to work that week. I've just never had that feeling. I suspect you haven't had that either. Maybe some Mondays are worse than others. But how do you really dive into something and be great at it if it's always a chore?
I think it's super hard. That'd be super hard. Now, there's always going to be rough stretches in anything you do. So that's not what I'm talking about. But you have to fundamentally enjoy what you're doing. And hey, I want to be good at this. I want to be a key member of this team. I really love what we're going after. I think this makes sense. That all matters a lot. I think if you don't have that, it's very hard to give it your all.
You and your co-founder, Steve, I watched a talk that you guys gave, I think at Cornell, and it was like PB&J. You two were such a funny kind of odd couple together, and you're literally finishing each other's sentences.
For business partnerships to work, I think you got to be aligned around what your goals are, and you need to treat it like a marriage where there's going to be good days and bad days, and getting hung up on small things is generally, you generally regret that. And my wife will tell you I'm still getting better at it, and I'm not great yet.
And she'll tell me this too.
But we've only been married for 10 years, so, I still have a long time to learn. And,
Did you know once you sold the first company, like when did you guys decide, let's do something together again? I guess I'm a little surprised that even for a second you went and explored your own paths, given what I see of you two now.
Well, I think for us, part of that, I wouldn't say it was like that overt because we were working on ideas together as well. It's just we had never really, we started our first company right out of college, out of that one entrepreneurship course we took. So we had never really been at a juncture where we had to make a real decision about what we wanted to do. And so all of a sudden we're at a juncture where it makes sense to make a decision about what you want to do. But I'd say we very quickly decided we'd want to do something together again. And that's what we did. So I think when you talk about the talk at Cornell, we're finishing each other's sentences. I mean, we've now worked together for so many years and we know each other so well that I think that's just, probably pretty natural given, we were friends since 1990. We've worked together since 1995. So you just think about that amount of time. That's pretty substantial.
Are there things that you two do together, like any other couple, to cultivate or foster like strength?
So our families are friends with each other. We have a broad group of friends in Boston. We're in this kind of same social circle, not exclusively, but a bunch of our friends overlap. But, I'd say we're also pretty different. So it's
how so?
I'd say, our hobbies don't necessarily exactly line up. The Conines really enjoy spending time in the mountains, whereas my wife and I, we have a place on the water in Cape Cod. And it's just simple things that might be drawn to different things. We have a lot in common. Our kids are similar ages. They have 3 kids. We have 2 kids, but they're all kind of in a 5-year band age-wise. And so some of the kids are more similar. Some of the kids are a little more different. But for example, our son and one of his sons are on a robotics team together.
That's cool.
For years when they're in high school. So there's things that I'd say are very similar, but then their family vacation might involve like hiking, which is not what our family vacation. Now, my wife would probably prefer that it did, but probably not what our family vacation would involve. So we're good friends.
What was the closest to rock bottom for you two? Like where you're like, I don't know if this is going to work with us.
I think in the beginning of a business partnership, it's probably like the beginning of a relationship where you're kind of like figuring out kind of how everything will work and what you're drawn to and how well you get along. And I think kind of somewhere in there, you kind of figure out if it works well or if it doesn't work well. In our case, I would say, we were drawn to different areas of the business that were highly complementary. We really trusted each other's business judgment. And so it's worked incredibly well. And so when I've had other early stage founders ask me for advice about business partnerships, I always tell them, hey, it'll only really work if you trust each other's judgment really significantly. But if you also have areas you're drawn to that are different and highly compatible. It never works if you're both drawn to the same thing, want to do the same thing as each other. It'll never work whether it's 2 or 3 of you, whether you're constantly disagreeing on things. So I think there's a little bit of luck in that you're figuring it out as you go. But I think there's kind of pretty basic things that end up determining whether a business partnership is going to work or not.
Since you started this company, how many people are in Boston relative to like other places?
We probably have a few thousand people here in Boston.
Wow.
Basically in the building you're in. And our workforce is, we have kind of the corporate staff, which is sort of half technology, half not technology. That's like 5,000 or 6,000 people there. Then we've got a large customer service organization of 2,000 to 3,000 people. And then I mentioned how we've really grown a lot in logistics. So the 25 million square feet of logistics space, all the transportation terminals, we have 50 plus of those. And that is probably another 4,000 or 5,000 people. And then the corporate staff, the largest group would be here in Boston, but we have probably about a half a dozen offices around the world where folks might be based. So Boston would be the largest single location, and it's going to have over half the corporate staff, but we operate in many places.
How nuts was it during COVID? Let's just use COVID as a time where demand probably doubled for you.
During the very, very beginning, yes.
Like it was insane, right?
Yep.
It happened, by the way, for most SaaS companies too. It's just insane. I think it's different because for your business, like there's probably a much closer proportional ratio of demand to people than maybe in a software business, a pure software business, I should say.
Definitely when you think about kind of customer service and fulfillment, transportation.
How do you manage the problem of demand surging and then dropping down precipitously with the people problem that needs to then surge? And then, of course, obviously ended up, you had to let go of a bunch of people. Like in another universe, how do you even do it differently? Does that make sense? Does the question make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I mean, when you have a surge, you're doing your best to try to satisfy that demand. And, you're just stretching everything in your operation as best as you can. I would say the mistake we made was actually not particularly tied to that. When you talk about customer service, fulfillment, transportation, our biggest place where I think in hindsight we maybe made a mistake is we let the corporate staff grow too much. And the corporate staff, when you talk about like a SaaS software business, you don't necessarily need to scale that if your demand is scaling, right? You're scaling your corporate staff generally around, do you want to expand and do things? Do you want to do more things? And I think there we've learned a lot about as we grow what the right ways to expand or not to expand the headcount is, because you can drive a lot of innovation through technology and you need good prioritization, because even though you may have a long list of great ideas, it's probably only possible for your company to get a certain portion of them done well, because they require different parts of the company to all work together. And if you try to get too many done at the same time, you create a lot of complicated contention for resources that make it hard for things to get done well. And so I'd say that was a really good learning for us. And so that's actually made us substantially stronger as we figured that out. But it did lead to a period where we did have too many people. Now, what I'd say is we have an amazing team. And so we kind of have had to work our way through that. And that's why we've been doing well for the last 18 months in a category that's been really challenged. We've taken substantial market share.
Have you?
Yeah. Since the end of 2022, we were back to taking significant market share. And for the last 6 quarters, we've been the big winner in home, taking excess market share in what's been a challenging time. And we've done it because we have an amazing team of people focused on the right priorities. And that, I think, was an outcome of us basically getting focused on needing to get back there. That's how we built the business. During COVID, I think we a little bit lost our way. Working from home and some of these things were really challenging for us to operate the way we're used to operating. And getting folks back together really helped unlock a lot of gains.
When you say taking market, like who are you taking market share from over the last 6 quarters or so?
So the thing that maybe is not super well understood about home goods, all the categories we're in, is first its size. So when you talk about the US and Canada, you talk about North America, it's about $400 billion in annual sales. And when you talk about Europe, you get about that same amount of revenue again. So it's a really big end market. Then you say, well, who are the big players? Some of the folks you're going to think of, they're big, but they might only be $5 billion in annual revenue, or $1 billion, or $2 billion, or $3 billion. It's not a category that is owned by anyone in particular. It's highly fragmented. And what's been happening is
within home goods.
What I'm telling you is about home goods.
Yep,
exactly.
Yep.
One of the things that is maybe less well understood is when you start thinking about the advent of e-commerce. So now you start thinking about the technology needs you have. You start thinking about the logistics you need for e-commerce. And you start thinking about, well, what are the other needs you have for like brick and mortar retail and merchandising? And it's a business where If you're large, you can have the resources to do all these things well if it's what you focus on. And if you're super small, if you're like a one-store owner-operator, you could probably create a great boutique. But in the middle, it probably gets hard to compete because you don't necessarily have that full-on, hands-on service and execution that you would have if it was just your own one boutique store. But you also don't have the resources you would have if you're much larger, have that scale, to have the logistics, to have the technology resource, et cetera. And so what happened is when you start saying who focuses on home goods, we become one of the largest players who focuses on home goods. And there's only a handful of folks out there. So where's share gone? Amazon's been getting share at the commodity end. We've been getting share kind of throughout the whole mix of the category. And at brick and mortar, home goods chain, which is owned by TJX, has been taking share. And where's it coming from? It's coming from pretty much across the board. So what's notable are some folks who went out of business, whether it's Bed Bath & Beyond or Pier 1. So people know who those folks are. But what you can also look is you can see a whole lot of other retailers, and in their quarterly filings, they talk about how their home business is down X%, down Y%. And you can kind of see that shares coming out, and you see this in the credit card data as well, shares coming out from many, many folks kind of across the board.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think, again, when you start thinking about the way in which the world works today, for consumers, it's easier and easier for them to concentrate their purchasing at wherever the best place for them is. You think about e-commerce, it's automatically a national business. So whereas before, maybe you would buy from a store that was right down the road, and the store that was maybe an extra 10 miles was at a significant disadvantage, even though maybe it was a better fit for you. That extra 10 miles was a source of friction. Is it worth it for me to drive that amount of extra distance? But if you're buying online, they're both equally distant. So, hey, I might as well go to the best one. Why would I go to the one that's less good? And a lot of these frictions like distance or whatever, or drive time, whatever, go away. Then when you start talking about, hey, who can offer me the best selection, the best merchandising? A lot of that's enabled through technology. Who can afford that really advanced technology, and who can really, make sure that they're providing that best experience, and who can then build that advanced logistics to provide those fast, convenient deliveries and all of this? Well, it has to be a scale player. So then you could say, hey, there might be a really good mid-sized player that was winning because they had, 20 great stores. Well, what happens when they now need to provide their offering online as well? Can they be quite as good? Well, all of a sudden, they probably can't offer that same level of experience to the customer, whether it be the breadth of selection, whether it be the convenience and speed of delivery, whether it be the, in-stock availability, whether it be some of the more novel technology around how you do personalization, how you do visualization. By specializing in home goods and having scale, we're this pretty unique player that can start offering a really great experience.
Is there an optimal amount of SKUs within a gift, let's just say for couches? If I go to a restaurant and there's way too much on the menu, I don't like that. In some ways, it's maybe better for the consumer to have a narrower band of choices. Does that exist in retail?
Yeah. So I think the optimal answer is yes and. What I mean by that is having a curated selection that's easy for someone to navigate, that's finite, is quite valuable. But optimal is that you couple it with an immense selection that when they have a need that's not satisfied, it's easy for them to expand. So what does that mean? Well, if you know that we have 20,000 bar stools, but hey, here are the 200 we would focus you in on. But if you tell me you want a pink bar stool, we have 24 for you to pick from, which happen not to be in those 200. That's pretty optimal. Because it's easy for you to navigate and you just want to see that core collection, you can see it. But you start having a specific need for whatever reason, you have a specific need. We have filters and search. It's easy for you to put in your specific need and you still end up with a nice set of choices. That's ideal. If you think about it, what would you do 30 years ago if you wanted pink bar stools? You'd be calling around, driving around. You'd be having a hard time finding that. Maybe you'd have to pay a tremendous amount to get them custom made. Maybe you have to buy something else, sand them down and paint them. Or, it just wouldn't be a very good solution for you. But if finding the pink bar stools makes it hard to understand what the core offering is for the customer who just wants to come in and see, hey, what are the kind of items I should start by browsing? That would be a challenge too. So I think you can combine the two. But to do that, you have to have a nuanced view of home. And this is the benefit of only focusing on this category. So if we focused on apparel, we'd have to worry a lot about like a 50% returns rate and the fact that seasons only last, 12 weeks. And, if you're kind of in the middle of the summer and you have a lot of swimsuits left, you have a problem. You got to figure out what to do about them. Well, we don't have those challenges, but we have different challenges around home. How do you help someone navigate it? How do they understand the selection? They don't buy this particular class of goods that often. So if they're buying a mattress, it doesn't matter that they bought a rug from you and a lamp from you and a bed from you and a grill. No, right now they're trying to buy a mattress. How do you make it easy for them to understand what's good, what's better, what's best, how to figure out what they care about? So we focus on that. Most folks don't even focus on apparel or home. They focus on more generalist categories, and that's why most folks are called general merchandisers. If you're trying to buy dish soap, you're trying to buy iPhone cables, there's not a lot to it, right? You're going to show a limited assortment. There's a few national brands in certain categories like paper towels, Bounty, Brawny, 7th Generation. You're going to pick amongst those. That's one type of shopping experience. That's what most large players do. We tend to focus on this very nuanced, specialized version, which is what home is. As I mentioned, fashion is another nuanced experience. Obviously, shopping for automobiles would be a third one, but there's only a few categories that are really nuanced and different. Most categories fit into this general merchandising type approach. And this is what creates the opportunity, is that we can be specialized in the experience you have in the shopping, but also in all the logistics that support it and the technology that supports it and everything we do with you. That's why customers care about home and then shop differently. Said differently, they care about it as a very specific category. It's emotional, there's aesthetic, and they shop differently because of that. And that's where we fit.
How do you think about the balance between penetrating your existing TAM versus growing it? Meaning, right now, you continue to do more within the home goods space, and you're finding new ways of getting to more customers within this buying center, whether that's a retail physical footprint, whether that's more SKUs. Would you just say, Juven, this market is so big within this vertical, we need to focus on this forever, versus like, maybe we should go into some of these other areas? Because you do have the infrastructure.
From where we sit right now at 12 billion in revenue, it would be foolish to not focus on it. There's such a big opportunity inside it, and we're very small. We're large when you think about $12 billion in revenue, annual revenue. But that's pretty small when you start thinking about it as a percentage of the market we're competing in. One of the human nature tendencies is to want to always get excited about the next thing and the different thing. And I think one of the things we've seen is that there's a lot of benefit in being a specialist and focusing. And where we have such little market share, we think it's crazy to want to expand a focus outside of home goods, whereas there's so much room from where we sit today. We're pretty excited about the things we can do to make the experience even better, how we can capture more and more share, whether that be more customers or more share of wallet from the existing customers. And you mentioned some of the things we're doing, but there's a long list of things we're doing that all add up. And so, yeah, we definitely think it makes sense to focus.
Isn't it funny, like when someone, I don't know, let's just imagine you give some talk and someone will ask you like, what are the keys to being successful? Or like, what are the keys that made Wayfair what it is? I bet that's a pretty hard question to answer because like, I don't know, there's like 1,000. There's like hundreds of thousands of keys to this thing. It's like consistently stacking brick by brick, all of these things over a 22-year time horizon. Do you have perspective on that?
The details would have a list of 1,000 things. I think you can abstract it up and say, hey, focus on a problem that you think you can make better for the customer. What problem can you solve or make better? Do that. Be tenacious. Your podcast called Grit, right? Just be driven, be ambitious, but always make sure you're doing something for the customer. And, it's a competitive world. So you're going to have competitors out there, but there's no reason why you and your team cannot do a better job than those competitors. And if you do, customers are smart. They'll reward you for that. That's how you'll take the share. So then you start saying, well, then you get into the details of obviously first start by being pretty savvy about picking the right market and the right problem. But after that, each day you're going to learn new things that will help you add to the list of things you should do. You need to be smart in how you prioritize those, but be aggressive, be ambitious, be driven, go after those things, have a great work ethic. Those teams that get more done in that same amount of time are going to win relative to those that worry about the customer less and do less for them as a result. And so I think there's a little bit of method behind the madness that I think you're going to find as the story in any great company.
When you say great work ethic, and by the way, the only reason I'm asking is because I think that it's very helpful for people to hear specifics on like, hey, this is what that actually means. And that this is like the result of that. You know, like what is a great work ethic? How does that manifest for you?
I think the way it manifests for me, and I think the way it manifests for all kinds of folks at Wayfair, is like when people own an area of the business, they create a plan on what they want to get done. They then kind of figure out what they need to do, them and their team and other colleagues, and they own it and they get it done. And that's kind of like how we as a company get a lot done when you add all the different things that every team is doing, adds up together. It's kind of what you said earlier. You said, hey, if I think of going to work as a chore, it's probably going to be harder to be successful. Well, I think so, because if you think of it as a chore, you're unlikely to have that same ownership mentality where you're like, hey, this is my thing. I want to make the most of it. What can I do? And I think that kind of mentality of saying, hey, I own this, I'm going to make something of it, that's going to translate into making sure you make the right decisions, making sure you get the things done that you want to get done, making sure that you constantly use the data you're getting to figure out what twists and turns you should take. I think it all adds up. One aspect of work ethic is obviously working hard at something, but then there's also the piece of working smart at things, making good decisions, making sure you never get disconnected from the customer. I think that's why our team has done well. That's what we get excited about doing. And I think, again, that's going to be a common theme you're going to find in successful companies.
Is it possible to work at the pace that you would like to for as long as you have worked at Wayfair? It's very rare that I see companies that have been built for this enduring of a time, powered by the same sets of people from the foundation of that company.
I think it's important to figure out how to work at a pace that's sustainable. And so, what does that mean? Well, I think it means something slightly different to different people, whether it be about how much sleep you need to get a night or whether it needs to be about making sure you have time to exercise or…
What's sustainable for you? What are the things that you know you need?
I've always tried to make sure that I do a good job of understanding the things I want to get done, not just work, but times I want to spend with my family, things I want to do personally, and have a plan that accomplishes all of those things. I tend not to divide up the time and say, oh, I'll work during these hours. I won't work during those hours.
Sure.
I'll do family things during those hours. I won't during these hours. Because what I've found in life is that things are a little more fluid than that. And so I'll kind of anchor around the key things I want, and then I'll figure out what I do in other times. And that works for me. I think one of the wonderful things about email, for example, is that it's asynchronous. And so you can catch up and send off notes when it works for you, and other folks can respond when it works for them. And so I think there's a way to communicate and a way to do work and a way to divide and conquer that sort of lets everyone structure things the way that works for them. And as a group, you get a tremendous amount done. But I don't think you want to go in with an assumption that you need to do something that's unsustainable. There's, of course, periods, bursts that maybe are unsustainable. But I think just like your comment about it's going to be hard to win if what you're doing is a chore, I think it's going to be hard to win if you choose an approach that needs to go on for a long period of time and it is unsustainable because something's going to have to give.
Revisiting the comment that you made earlier about like the right product for the right person for the right time. On my walk over here, there's like a cool old church. Took a picture of it on ChatGPT, and it told me everything about it.
Yep.
Spotify is doing a pretty good job of some of this stuff right now of like, what I listen to, make me the playlist. Yep. This has to be the next bastion of excitement for you all. As a consumer, I will very quickly start to expect that I should be able to send you a picture of my entire apartment. And like maybe people say they like architects, there's some of this today, but it's not really. And you are just like, based on these colors, based on this sizing, all of that, here is the thing. There has to be a lot of effort going into that.
Personalization is a very key part of how you make the experience really good for a consumer. And if you just think about what is increasingly possible as machine learning moves to Gen AI, as you combine the two, there's a lot. You have a category that's visual, that has huge selection. You have people's aesthetic tastes that are all unique and different. I would say that that's a journey we've been on for quite some time, and we continue to advance on it in a way that I think is really exciting. And I think to your point, it's going to be easier and easier for folks to articulate what they like in a way that needs to be less structured and easier for them and get more and more exciting outcomes from like browsing and discovery standpoint.
Whoever does that first, it does feel like a meaningful competitive advantage. That just feels like the ultimate version of personalization.
It's pretty amazing. Remember again the value of first-party data. Think of all the millions and millions of folks that are constantly browsing our selection and have bought items from us over the year and have uploaded photos to us. And so I think one of the ways that we can do a great job is not just being very ambitious and driven and savvy with the use of technology, but also making sure that we harness all the data we have.
Do you worry like, all right, I have to go hire a bunch of people and compete with Silicon Valley tech companies for the AI talent that we might need to go build the future of a recommendation system that is world-class?
We have a technology team that's world-class, and I think that's been one of the big competitive advantages we've had over time, because generally folks who grew up in brick and mortar retail did not view technology in the same way that I think kind of a current generation of companies do. Now, that's all been changing over time, but we've always had the view from the very beginning is the power of technology. And I mentioned we have thousands of technologists, and it's not just the number of them, but it's the caliber of them. We have a great office in Mountain View, for example. It's one of the places we have an office. We have an office in Austin and Toronto. We have an office in Shanghai and Bangalore and Berlin and London. We have obviously our office here in Boston. We have amazing talent in great places that are specialized in great areas that build a lot of skills. So whether you want to talk about personalization recommendations and the technology tied to that, whether you want to talk about building a logistics network, or whether you want to talk about how we do merchandising, I think that's part of how we're winning, is that the people, if you met all these people, you would be very impressed. When you talk about this category of goods, I don't think there's anything that we have competitors doing that you'd say, oh, geez, you're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah. Dude, I'm super excited to see what you all do. And I hope you continue carrying the torch for another 20 plus years. You'll be in a league of your own. Do you think you want to do this forever? Do you ever think about like, oh, geez, like, what's going to be the day where I don't run Wayfair anymore? Like, it's just been 2 decades.
I mean, I enjoy what I'm doing, but I will say that I wouldn't take credit for running Wayfair. We have an amazing team of people.
You know what I mean. At the helm. You and Steve have been at the helm of this thing for a while.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to sell our senior team short. I think we have people who are definitely running big chunks of the business. And so I wouldn't credit it to Steve and I think that's part of, how we've been able to do as many things as we've done.
You don't think about a day when you're not here?
I mean, I think I'd stay involved with the company in one way or another.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
No, I don't think about ever like departing permanently.
There's very few CEOs and founders and teams that have gone just even this far for this long. It's just super cool to see. I appreciate you doing this. Are you all hiring?
We are hiring.
Any key roles? What are you hiring for? Where are you hiring?
Yeah, so I'd say right now, a few things. One, I mentioned the fulfillment center network. We've got a bunch of senior leadership roles in that we're hiring for. Let me tell you the single thing I'm most excited about. I think we may have hired these folks, but the single biggest thing I'm excited about, prior to COVID, we would bring in a number of young folks right out of college every year, and we'd kind of grow folks up through the ranks. One of the things that got tough during COVID was ramping up younger folks with no experience on a remote basis. So this is the first year in 5 years we have a large class of folks joining as they graduate from college. We have probably 300 folks joining this summer or something like that. So I'm pretty excited about that.
When I was in the lobby, there was a bunch of young folks walking in and out.
Yeah, I think, folks start, various times throughout the summer, and I think they're ramping up now.
It's awesome. Yeah, the front desk guy was like, what are you here for? And I'm like, a meeting. And he's like, well, any other details? And I was like, I don't know. Like, what other answers are there? And he was like, well, there's a lot of new hires. Like, we're getting, like, there's a lot of new people coming in, like sometimes people bring their parents in, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, this just got to be a cool feeling. When you hear the word grit, what do you think of?
Grit, I think of perseverance, tenacity, being driven, scrappy, figuring things out. Just, having that drive to get to the other side.
Thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you.
That's it. Thanks for tuning in. Feel free to come back every Monday morning to listen to a new guest, or go back into the archives when we've done more than 100 episodes. This podcast is a Kleiner Perkins production, and the episode was edited by Eric Johnson from Lightning Pod. Thank you all.